Okay. So I'm going to start with a video, a short video, and I think will then introduce you to really the basis and foundation of this presentation, which is gardening with nature, right? Just trying to imitate nature and get great results with without all of the problems that we have, pests and so on. So there we go. And if someone can let me know that you can hear this.
There's so much bad news about our planet. It's so overwhelming. The truth is, I've given up. This is the story of a simple solution, a way to heal our planet. The solution is right under our feet, and it's as old as dirt.
All of our soils that are under chemical conventional agriculture are almost completely devoid of microorganisms.
Modern agriculture was not designed for the betterment of the soil.
Fossil fuels are by no means the only thing that is causing climate change. When we damage soils, carbon goes back to the atmosphere.
But when we destroy soil, it releases carbon dioxide.
Biosequestration is using plants, trees, and techniques of grazing and farming to capture carbon and store it in the soil.
We can fix a lot of our climate issues if we bring the CO2 down into a living plant and put it back into the soil where it belongs.
Plants working with soil microorganisms, it seems too simple.
Healthy soils lead to a healthy plant, healthy human, healthy climate.
There could be a way to eat food that heals the planet.
The problem isn't the animal. The problem is where the animals are at.
How do we take waste and repurpose and reuse it, because it's really not waste?
The poop has to stay in the loop.
Compost is just one of a suite of soil-based carbon capture solutions.
We know how to do it. And if we continue to scale over 30 years, we can reverse global warming.
We can get the Earth back to the Garden of Eden that it once was by regeneration.
To see biodiversity return to a place that was completely devastated.
That gives me hope.
Our health and the health of our planet are connected.
If you look over here, my neighbor's land that has been chemical fallow, then you look over at our paddocks, you have a diversity of different plant species. Which model do you want your food to be produced from? The answer is pretty simple to me.
I'll make you a deal. I won't give up, and neither should you.
Okay, so that's a clip from a movie, Kiss the Ground, that came out 2020. I'd highly recommend that you watch it. And underpinning this whole presentation, and here we go. I'll just go full screen here. Yeah, underpinning this whole presentation is that we've got some issues facing us on this planet, and whether we're home gardeners or we're people who live in the city and we just want to purchase really great food, it's important to understand the concepts that I'm about to explain in this presentation. And I can get deep into the weeds if you want. It's totally up to you guys, but armed with this knowledge, whether you plan on growing food or medicine or just buying food and medicine, this information will help you in your journey. And so let's get started here with the next slide.
There's so much.
Can you guys see the orange screen in Introduction to Living Soil?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, maybe it's sharing. What is it showing you guys?
Just the top tab bar.
Okay, we'll try that again. How about now?
Yes,
Nice.
that's better.
Okay. So the soil food web is, if you haven't heard about it, it's a way of describing the community of organisms that live in the soil. And this phrase was coined by someone named Dr. Elaine Ingham. She's did a lot of work at an institute called Rodale in the States. It's pretty fascinating, and it's a great little term that's easy to remember that describes this activity that's going on. It's really a fertilizer factory. And the way it works is just like above ground. If you think about a lion or a tiger, they're going to eat an impala or other grazing animal. Those animals are eating each other in a cycle, right? And this same sort of process is happening beneath the soil, and it's how plants provide fertility for themselves. And it's not a mistake to describe it in that way. Really, plants are what are farming, and they're farming microbes. We think of ourselves as the gardener or the farmer, but really our job is to create an environment that will allow the plant to then take over and do its thing. And following World War II, the advent of commercial agricultural fertilizers, they were really cool. They had really great results, and it seemed like magic. You could force feed a plant, and there was explosive growth. Just 1 second here. I'm going to turn off my phone volume. So there was explosive growth. It was absolutely miraculous, fantastic. Many farmers jumped on board. But it's like anything new, we didn't know what the outcome was. And the outcome is, look at our modern life. We're in deep trouble. And I advertised this talk about, ditching the plastic. And there's a real, impetus behind that. Plastics, we'll find out sooner or later, but as it stands now, I don't know if anybody noticed, but we have a massive increase in the amount of autism. We have a massive increase in gender dysphoria. We have a massive increase in all of these diseases like multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, and so on. And we've never been sicker. And a lot of it has to do with environmental toxins, whether it's coming from plastics as they break down, or it's coming from the chemicals that we are using to feed plants and then to deal with the pests. So let's talk about pests. Pest pressure is what we call it. Why does it happen, and what can we do about it? Why are pesticides necessary in this modern agricultural context? If we look at this image that you can see on the right, and I think I've got maybe a better one in the next slide. Here it is a little bigger. You can see, actually, no, let's go back here. Because this picture has the sun. So the sun obviously has energy. The plant absorbs it. Photosynthesis takes place. The plant has what are called exudates, and the plant begins to share with the soil. And although I'm going to dig into this and it's going to seem a little bit complex, it's not. It's very simple. The sun shines, the plant takes that, and it shares a percentage of its energy. It creates sugars, amino acids. It shares them with the soil for a reason. We have, in this picture, you can see there's organic matter, and then there's fungi and bacteria and so on. What's going on is that the plant is this huge factory for producing sugar, essentially. And I'm going to dumb this down, but it's essentially this is what's going on. Everything that's living in the ground is this huge factory of being able to produce and provide everything that's on the periodic table. They need each other. The plant has a problem. It cannot produce nutrients on its own. It needs to be fed. The microbes have a problem. They need sugar. And we're talking about the smallest level here, the fungi and the bacteria. they need sugar in order to do what they do. And this is all in the context of microbes that specifically work with plants. So you have a plant that needs sugar, a plant that is able to produce sugar, and you have microbes that have tons of minerals and nutrients, but they've got no sugar. So when you put them together, this is how fertilizer takes place in nature. These organisms literally eat each other, and in the process of doing so, they poop fertilizer, whatever it is that the plant needs at that moment. It could be nitrogen. I'm sure everyone's familiar with nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. These are some of the main elements that plants use, but realistically, they need everything on the periodic table. So that's what the soil food web describes. This whole process is a synergistic, symbiotic relationship between plants and the soil. And whether, no matter how long you think that the planet has been around, scientifically, we figure it's around 4.5 billion years or something like that. It's been doing this a long time, and it's been doing great. I don't know if you looked around, but it's been doing a great job. Like, look at the forest. I live on the in the Pacific Northwest, coastal BC. If I'm ever flying from back east, if you see those trees as you come in, it's just incredible. And nobody's fertilizing the forest, because you don't need to. The earth already has this system in place. And the problem is that we jumped on this chemical train, following World War II. And what happens is this: when you take chemical fertilizer and you feed it to a plant, two things happen, and they're both bad. Number one, the plant stops feeding the soil microbes. It stops trading sugar and amino acids and so on. Why does it do that? Well, because it's only sharing because it has to. It needs it. And if you start feeding a plant chemical fertilizers, it no longer shares with the soil food web. What do you think happens to these microorganisms when the plant stops feeding them? They die. Number two, nitrogen and these other elements that are fed to plants need to be stabilized somehow. And that's it's a chemistry thing. Just know that these chemicals are very volatile. Nitrogen, for example, it doesn't want to stay in a plant available form. It wants to be stable in some way. And that's what microbes do. They stabilize it in the soil. So these chemists, they figured out, hey, we can use salt. So they stabilize nitrogen in salt, for example. Well, what is salt? Salt is a preservative. Salt will kill microbes. So you've got a double whammy here. When we started using chemical fertilizers, we started killing the microbial diversity, and we outright poisoned the soil with salt, basically making it uninhabitable by these microbes. So this is why there's such a problem with pests, and why the conventional agricultural system, they go hand in hand. Chemicals require more chemicals because they've killed the diversity in the soil, and the result is that now there's an increase in pest pressure. And so now they need to use herbicides and fungicides and so on. They've just created an even bigger problem, because now we're really sick, as not just us, but the whole world is suffering. I used to drive up north here, where I am in BC, British Columbia, and we'd go up 4 or 5 hours up into what we call the Kootenays, or in the interior of BC. Your windshield used to just be absolutely covered in bugs and blood and spatter and everything from all these insects that you would hit as you were driving. And that doesn't happen anymore. The result of all of these herbicides and pesticides and fungicides and so on, they've decimated the diversity and the activity of all of these microbes that are really, really important. They all have a job to do. And that's really, once you understand that, why is my plant being attacked by pests? Your plant is being attacked because your plant is missing something. It's not well. And I'd like you to think about the soil food web, these organisms that are living in the soil, try not to think about them as good or bad. And we do that a lot when we talk. We try to say things are good or bad, but they're not. Everything has a job to do. Some of them, their job is to disassemble organic matter and return it to the soil. They're normal. They're great. They're great organisms. We want them. We need them. When we terminate a crop, they're there, and they will disassemble that crop at a molecular level and restore it and return it, making those nutrients available for more things to grow. So an unhealthy plant is sending out signals, basically begging the soil to recycle them. That's just how it works. So we've created, by collectively talking about humanity, we've created this disastrous scenario where, we've got plants that they're trying to be cleaned up by Earth because they're not healthy anymore. So we want to work with this system, and that's what this talk is really about, is trying, if you walk away with one thing, is for you to understand that fertilizer is free, it comes from the soil, and it's really simple. If you create a healthy, balanced ecosystem, and you avoid the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides and so on. And I know, guys, I know this can be really hard in the beginning. You put in all this work, and then you see your plant struggling, and the first thing you want to do is go grab something. You want to help that plant out. And I want you to do that, but not to reach for something to kill. What I want you to reach for is something to add microbial life. And I'm going to take a pause right now and just take any questions, and then we're going to move on, and we'll kind of dive in wherever we want. So does anyone have any questions? Just go ahead and speak up. No? Okay.
No,
It all
we're
makes
good
sense
so
then?
far.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we're good so far.
Okay, excellent. This is just a little bit of a bigger slide, and the real magic here is that this is all happening in the root zone of the plant. So the fungi and the bacteria, they're eaten by nematodes, and there's nematodes that eat fungi, there's nematodes that eat bacteria, there's nematodes that eat nematodes. They all regulate each other. And what's really fascinating is that, as I mentioned earlier, the plant is the farmer. The plant can control the pH of the soil. So if anyone here's been exposed to hydroponic or any kind of commercial growing, you'll know that pH is really important. And when you're working with chemicals, you're always struggling to keep pH in the ideal range for that plant. When you work with nature and you do as nature does, the plant can actually manipulate the pH of the soil to what it likes. And it does that by feeding certain microbes. So for example, when it feeds bacteria, the metabolism of the bacteria can produce the byproduct of the metabolism of the bacteria is that it makes the soil more alkaline. And if it decides that it needs it to be a little more acidic, well, the activities, the metabolic activity of fungi can then make the soil acidic. And that's generally the way it goes when you look at barren soil and then the transition to a forest. By the time you get to the forest, it's very highly acidic, because that's the nature of fungi and fungal activity. What we want as home gardeners is we kind of want to get it right in the middle. We want a one-to-one relationship between bacteria and fungi. And in doing so, we've created a really nice environment where it's very easy for plants to then adjust the environment as they see fit. And doesn't that sound nice? Isn't that so easy? I mean, if you're a major chemistry nerd and like that's exciting that you can manipulate this environment yourself. But I'm telling you, it's so complex that we don't even understand, 1/10 of 1% of how this all works. So if you just want to grow food, just know that if you work with this system, if you give the plant a soil that is capable of being balanced, right? It may not be in the beginning. Think of hard packed clay, right? Not ideal. It's too hard for root penetration. It's anaerobic and so on. But the building blocks are there. If we can introduce some aeration and we can introduce some water and a plant can live there, then the plant will take over and it will manage it and it will create the environment that it wants. It's just a question of time. So I will kind of plow through these, but basically everyone knows about bacteria. They're single-celled organisms. Bacteria, we don't ever really need to feed bacteria. They are just so plentiful and they're you know, there's not really a big issue with them. The issue that we have with soil is that we want fungi in there. So I'm going to touch a little bit more on that, but know that bacteria are really predominant. They're huge. There's a really cool one because this presentation I'm going to touch on composting. It's these actinomyces. It used to be thought of as a fungi, but it's actinobacteria. If you're making compost, thermophilic compost in the beginning, it's all of that filamentous, stringy stuff that you're seeing that's tying the compost together. And yeah, it's really, really cool stuff, along with lactobacillus. So actinobacteria and lactobacillus are worth a special note. And a fun fact is that bacteria can use fungi as highways and dating services. This is really cool. And I want to, as I touch on, here's just a little bit more about actinomyces. Maybe take a screenshot if you want. They're fascinating. And here's again lactobacillus, also super fascinating. In Korean natural farming, which is a style of gardening that I encourage you to take a look at, it is a very low cost way of growing food, working with nature. In Korean natural farming, or KNF, we call lactobacillus the police. They're a really cool organism because they get in the soil and they're not the no-knock warrant militarized modern police of, you know, America. It's not like that. They are friendly, help your grandmother who's senile get back home safe and sound, you know, that kind of police. Think about having a house party. You've got, you know, maybe you've got a 30-person limit. You've got 100 people at your party. Good cop's going to show up. They're going to kick out, you know, the excess number. They're not going to go in there and remove everybody. So lactobacillus, when you put them in the soil, they're the great restorers of balance. They don't just nuke everything. They get rid of the excess, and they're really important in organic matter decay. And you would be so amazed where you find lactobacillus. They're everywhere, and they're super important in composting and in growing and gardening. So there's something that we definitely can work with in order to promote a healthy plant ecosystem. It's all about balance. When a soil gets out of balance, let's say there's too much water, it's anaerobic, that means there's no oxygen, it stinks, the plant can't breathe. Plants need oxygen, they're just like us. And in a case like that, what's happened is it's gone out of balance. As soon as it goes out of balance, there's organisms in there that start to take over because they're viewing it as a window. You've created an environment for them to do their job. They're going to kill that plant. They're going to take over and do the opposite of what you're intending. So you as a gardener, your job, your goal is to try and just make sure that you've created an environment for the plant to be able to keep balance, right? The plant working with microbes. And so that's where, if you consider container growing, that's why we like to have holes in the bottom of our containers, and we like to have a catch tray, because we don't ever want standing water. We want to allow that water to flow through. Lactobacillus and actinobacteria are key in helping this sort of stage, because plants can handle a little bit of, you know, say it's a flood, right? And then it leaves. Plants can handle that. And these bacteria are special because they're known as facultatively anaerobic microorganisms. That's a really fancy mouthful of words that says they're like Aquaman. You know, they can breathe underwater or they can breathe above ground. When there's an absence of oxygen, their metabolism changes and they can still live and do work. They do different work, but they can do it in that state. So that's where they're so special. And I mean, you can talk for hours about them. They're fascinating. Rhizobia, these are really cool bacteria. They're actually found on legumes. And you see these little nodules in that picture. They're nitrogen fixing bacteria. That just means that they're able to pull nitrogen out of the air being 78% nitrogen. It's a phenomenal resource for nitrogen. It doesn't need to be in the soil. It can be in the air. And as long as we have the right microbes in the soil, then they can fetch all the nitrogen that they need. And there's a lot of really cool things that you can do. For example, in cover cropping, if you've heard of that, it's the purposeful planting of, for example, a nitrogen fixing plant like a legume, that's peas, beans, and so on, and then terminating them before they flower, and then bringing in another crop, which will then feed on that nitrogen that's now trapped and fixed in the soil by this other crop. So that's pretty cool. There are also free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria that do the same thing. Now let's get into fungi. I had in that slide a few slides ago about bacteria using fungi to get around. We've seen a lot of war lately, right? You've all seen Palestine. You've all seen Gaza. You've seen Ukraine. You've seen what's going on there. What did the Russians do and what did Israel do when they started, right? They took out logistics and communication. They took out the power. They took out the internet. They took out the water, right? Why? Because if you do that, you cause a lot of problems. Now I want you to take this and now apply it to the soil. When you disturb the soil, whether that's through tillage or any other type of disturbance, you are taking out logistics and communication. You are making the soil soft in the example of tilling, but you're shooting yourself in the foot in such a massive way. Think about the water, think about internet, think about power. It needs to be connected, right? Everybody needs to share this resource. So that's what fungi do. They connect everything together. And if you look at the earth and the way nutrients are deposited in the soil, it isn't just this homogeneous or nice little evenly distributed mix of everything on the periodic table in the right amount, just evenly distributed everywhere. Not at all. There's pockets of nutrients. And that's where the fungi are so necessary if you want to garden at the genetic potential of plants. And we know they're capable of amazing things. We've seen it. It's just, why isn't that happening in my garden? The number one reason it's probably not happening in your garden is you've got a logistics and communication issue. You've got to restore it. So think about composting. That's why we're always trying to get fungi in our compost, or we want to get fungal spores in our compost so that when we apply that compost, and that those fungi can rebuild those networks. And that's our goal. And that's the real magic behind no-till or no-dig style of gardening, is because we're not continually destroying, the communication. It's like, can you imagine if your power went off like every 15 minutes? Like, you'd probably stop using electricity, right? It would be really, really challenging to live there. Well, imagine being a plant. You're trying to get water. Fungi will help you. How do they help you? Think of a plant's roots. Maybe they spread out a few feet. Well, fungi can go for miles and miles, right? They tie everything together. So imagine your property, you've got some phosphorus in one corner, maybe you got a little nitrogen over here in another corner, you've got some boron over here. The fungi connect to the plant roots and they enable them to then fetch and have access to all of these nutrients and water. So you see a reduction in watering. You see a reduction in the need to provide any minerals and nutrients because the fungi are there. They're designed to work with plants. You really, really need them. Trying to garden without fungi it's so advanced. I mean, it's possible, but it comes with so many problems. Most notably, you stress the plant out. When a plant is stressed, that's sending out epic, huge signals. You know, think of the bigger than the bat signal, man. It's out there. Hey, eat me. That's what it's saying. So fungi are key. We want to, if we want to heal the soil, we need to get the fungi back in there. Don't worry, it's super, super easy. And if anyone on this call is interested in you know, does this scale? It scales infinitely, like to even the largest scale of commercial agriculture. There is a system of, by doing cover cropping and then terminating that cover crop. So we come along and we kill it just before it goes to seed. Then we come along. John Deere has something called a no-till drill. It comes along and it pokes a hole in the soil. It plants a seed. You can even inoculate those seeds with microbes, and then it just a tiny little bit of soil disturbance, right? We're not crazy here. We're not saying no till or no dig. We're trying to go minimal. We want to only disturb the soil when we have to. An example of that would be, hey, I'm growing potatoes. I'm growing garlic. I'm growing any kind of root vegetable. Of course, there's going to be some soil disturbance as I pull that plant out of the ground. So we have to disturb the soil in some way, but by creating an environment where fungal networks are able to thrive, we're able to keep that disturbance, the result of that disturbance, to a minimum. Yeah, this is really cool. And I think I've got a video next. So think about bacteria. So I have a plant that is associating with certain bacteria, and I've got maybe some other plants of the same type that would also work with that bacteria. But think about how small bacteria are. Think about how hard it would be just for a bacteria to move, say, 20 feet. I mean, that's like me walking across America or walking across Canada. I mean, it would take forever. In fact, maybe it's more like walking around the world or walking to the moon. I don't know. It's pretty outlandish. But if you've got fungal networks around, bacteria will actually use the fungi to get around. This is super important because the plants are really resilient. They can work with so many different types of microbes, but there are certain microbes that, if present, these plants are just that much easier to reach their genetic potential. And so think about these bacteria being able to get around. It's super important. So that's going to reduce pest pressure. This is a little too complex, but again, just driving home, take a screenshot if you want. But there's just this amazing connection between fungi and bacteria in the soil. And here's just more about it. And I'll see if here's the video. So watch this, guys. This is really cool. You see that? You got bacteria running along this thin film of water that's around the fungi. So super important. Okay, next, I'm not going to go too much into these guys. Sorry, did someone have a question?
Biggest thing, yeah. There's nothing ever better than the first, except the second. Second child. Sometimes the second can be better than the first.
I hear you, Jared. I don't know if you're
Oh, I'm sorry.
Asking a question, or you just
no, sir, no.
Hot mic. Oh. Okay. So you know that picture of the soil food web, it showed other organisms. There's protozoa, there's amoebas. Anyone who remembers science class, but you know, all you need to know is that these things eat each other. And this second point here, that and if you want, I have some information about the carbon economy and how this all works. There's some math involved. It's super fascinating. You just need to know that protozoa have a lower concentration of nitrogen in their cells than the bacteria that they eat. So when the the bacteria that are eaten by the protozoa contain too much nitrogen for the amount of carbon that protozoa need. They release the excess nitrogen in the form of ammonium. Ammonium is a form of nitrogen, NH4+. This happens in the root system of a plant. So think about, if you've heard of just-in-time logistics, it's why everything went sideways through COVID. Supply chains were disrupted because they're so intimately connected that things are just arriving the moment that they're needed. So if there's any delay in transit, you've got massive supply chain issues, and we saw that through COVID. So this is just-in-time fertilizer. So what's happening is, as the plant gets hungry, as it goes, okay, I need nitrogen, I'm going to start vegetatively growing, it's going to then feed bacteria. It's going to change the shape of the sugar. It's absolutely fascinating. There's many different types of sugar. And so it will feed a specific type of bacteria that it somehow knows protozoa are going to chow down on, and boom, now you've got this release of nitrogen in the root zone just when it wants it. So if you think about the root zone, that's a really important part of the plant. We don't see it, but it's there. The bigger it is and the healthier it is, the more it can do, the more fertility it can create, the more water it can get. And these organisms are all intimately related in this system. So super cool. Nematodes are another one. They're tiny worms. They're one of the most exciting things that you see when you start looking under a microscope. They're fascinating, and they're everywhere. And they're doing the same thing. As they eat, they poop. And what do they poop? Everything that the plant wants. There's also arthropods. Now, these are guys that we see physically. I like to tell people, if it scurries, if it's fast, it's usually a predator. As you're looking in the garden, if you see something just disappear, like this millipede and centipede that you see, they're generally predatorial, and they're in there doing the same thing, just at a macroscopic scale. They're eating and pooping. So when a millipede poops, it's a turd you can see, that is going to then get consumed by the microorganisms, and so on. So we like to see these in the soil. And when we do, if you see, it's like that old adage, where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, where there's predator, there's prey. So if you have like an ick factor about nature, I'm not gonna lie, like some of this stuff's kind of disgusting. Worms and so on, it can be gross, but you don't have to get in there and get dirty, but you do need to respect and appreciate that these organisms are all doing a job. So spiders especially, and I know people hate on spiders, but if you see a spider in your home, guess what that means? There's food in your home, right? There's ants, there's flies, there's something else that they can eat. So same thing in nature, we're going to use the presence of these different organisms to tell us about the health of our garden. So get to know these guys is pretty cool. And like anything, there's some people that say, oh, as a child, only a mother could love. Well, that child's getting love, right? That mom has some appreciation for it. And even though that maybe that child's got some undesirable traits, mother's love is still there. We want to have that same appreciation for these organisms in the soil. My favorite is this guy right here. This is called a black soldier fly. So I'm just going to introduce you to a couple of things that you might see in your garden or in your compost. I'm amazed to see these guys. I mean, once you know to look for them, all of a sudden you see them everywhere. And previously, maybe you thought you've never seen them before, but they're there. This is, flies are disgusting. We know that they're disease vectors, but they have a role to play. And this is something that you'll appreciate if you're getting into the composting side of things. Compost worms poop soil. They are it. They're the last thing to touch something before it becomes soil. And you can actually put that in your mouth. Like what's coming out of a compost worm is the most healthy stuff. It's absolutely amazing. But worms don't eat a lot of things. They don't have teeth, so they're certainly not eating a dead animal, and they don't like protein. They don't like animal protein. So flies, and really they're maggots, these guys are the key organisms that are dealing with protein, specifically animal protein, and returning it back to the soil. And these guys are to be truly appreciated. Although obviously we don't like to see them in our home, we really like to see them in our garden and in our. This is a black butterfly. Those crazy eyes. They're amazing because it's their what's living in their gut, as the slide says, that it destroys E. coli, fecal coliform, and other dangerous bacteria. So when we see them in our compost, rather than getting grossed out, they're in there, they're doing a job. They're breaking down that protein, and these things that if we were to touch them and get them into our body, they would make us really sick. They're in there cleaning it up. And through this whole journey, I have just such a profound amount of respect for flies, and particularly their maggots. This is what the fly's eggs look like. Black soldier fly. This is a much better kind of image of it. This is a female laying eggs. When you see how quickly they can return an animal to turn it into fertilizer, it'll blow your mind. And if you ever wonder why it's such a hard time finding when someone goes missing in the woods or whatever, like why they don't find the body, it could be in as little as pardon me, a little as 72 hours. They could just tear apart and destroy flesh, turning it into something that then the other lower order organisms can then break down and turn it into soil. Here's a video of it laying eggs. If anyone's seen Alien, you wonder where those guys kind of got those ideas from. It's got to be from like a termite queen or something like this. Absolutely fascinating. Composting worms, I touched on. This is pretty cool. I really hope that this will get you curious about worms. We see them all the time. Every time it rains, they're crawling across the ground, and I'm sure everyone's seen that. There are 1,800 different types of earthworms, but the ones that we're interested in, gardeners, we're really curious about them. There's Asenia fetida, red wiggler, or Asenia andrae, which is a red tiger. They're very common here in the Pacific Northwest, all over North America. You can see that's my hand. That's what they look like. They're not big. They're typically pink or purple in kind of color, and you can see why they're called red wigglers. They definitely range in hue, and they will wiggle. They will really. Some of them are quite vigorous. They can really jump almost. It's pretty amazing, but they're not very long. You can see in my hand there. I think the longest would be maybe 6 inches or so. It's not a hard and fast rule, but in general, they're quite small. They live in this top of the soil profile, 12 to 18 inches, because that's where the organic matter is. When leaves fall from trees, when we terminate a crop and we leave crop residue, that's what they're in there doing. And they poop the most amazing soil. It's loaded with growth hormones, and it's loaded with microbes. So let's go back to the beginning of this presentation when I told you what's happening with commercial fertilizers and pesticides, this problem that we have. The antidote is the compost worm. And by gardening and working with nature in such a way that these compost worms are able to be prolific, they're able to grow, they're able to do their thing, they're able to return this organic matter back to the soil, loaded with hormones and all kinds of things, in order to allow plants to have everything that they need, all of the right bacteria, all in the root zone of a plant. Not sure what. Okay, this is a compost worm hatching from a cocoon. So they will lay cocoons. They look like little lemons. They actually look like literal lemons. They're yellow when they start, and as they mature, they turn to this gold color. and you can see the size of the worm that comes out of there. The cocoons can handle being frozen. They could survive outer space. They're absolutely fascinating. They will hatch when the conditions are right, and there's anywhere from 2 to maybe even up to 6 worms in there. And you can look for these in the soil. They're very very common to see this time of year as nature enters its cycle of if you're above the equator or below the equator to a certain degree, things really shut down. Organic matter is being recycled, and this is a common time to see a lot of cocoons because the worms are able to shed these as a means of self-preservation, right? If a compost worm, which is like you and me, they really like 25 degrees. They can survive even into kind of -1, -2, and so on. They definitely slow down like you and I would. But they're not going to thrive in that area. They need to be warmer. So when things freeze, like think -20, that sort of thing, well, the cocoons can survive that, and they'll be back for the following season. So that's pretty cool. Here is a nematode that is feeding in the soil. You can actually see its mouth part kind of moving. This is a bacterial feeding nematode, and this is what's going on. You could see this with a child's microscope. I think this is at 300 times magnification. And this is just something, this is an example, a sample that I took of soil from one of my compost bins. This is some more microscopic footage. This is lactobacillus on the left. And on the right, this is called a collembola. It's called a springtail. These are really common to see in compost. They're really, really tiny little white things that they have a spring in their rear end, and they can jump like not as high as a flea, but they can definitely bounce around, and it's how they get around in nature. Pretty cool. This is a predatory rove beetle. This is really common to see in healthy soil. These guys rip around, and they're in there, and they're helping regulate pests. I really want to reiterate how important it is not to get into this like pests are bad, I need to get rid of them, good and bad. If you don't have any prey, you don't have any predators. You dig? You need them. So I don't freak out when I see aphids on my plants. Don't worry about it. If you've done everything right and you've created an ecosystem that is diverse, you've got places for birds to live, you've got shrubs, you've got trees, surrounding or dotted out throughout your garden. You don't just have a giant monocrop of one thing. You create that diversity in the environment. If you build it, they will come. There's a really great movie, Field of Dreams. That was the real premise of that film. Well, it's true in nature. If you create the environment, they will come. So these rove beetles and other predatory beneficials, they need something to eat. So that's why you don't want to freak out and start spraying insecticide. You just killed the food that these guys are going to eat. And in the beginning, in the early stages of adopting this style of gardening, yes, your plants might succumb to some of this pest pressure. But if you just sit back and you accept that you might lose a plant or two, especially in that first year, in our first year, we planted a lot of brassicas, a lot of cabbage, kale, that sort of thing. We planted too much of it, and we had a massive problem with cabbage fly moth. But the following year, we didn't have any problems at all. So it's a transition. So I want to really encourage you not just trust the process. It does work along the way. And personally, as a gardener, I'm willing to lose about 10% of my crop. I view that as a cost of doing business. These guys need to get fed, and losing a fruit or two or a plant or two is totally acceptable. So if you build it, they will come. And that's all I have to say about that. We could talk about that for hours and hours. And I want to leave time for questioning. So we got 10 minutes left. This is fungi on the right. Maybe we'll just see here what else we got. This is what compost can look like when it's fungal. This is a fungal mass consuming all of this wood chip and straw, and this is what you would see if you were gardening with wood chips on the ground, for example, as a living mulch. So I'm just going to pause here and just want to see if there's any questions before we run out of time, and then I will I can do a quick dive into composting. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't have any questions, Andrew, but I will say that that first 2 years where I sort of trusted you, I could see it coming. And now when I plant seeds and I have to look at how tall those plants get, I have to double it. Like, it is absolutely a game changer.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. If there's no other questions, I think I will just I'm going to plow through the composting, and I want everyone here to know, if you probably heard about this talk on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram. If you got questions, ask me questions. I'm here to try and share this knowledge. This knowledge should be free. Everybody should get it. If you're a commercial grower or someone with a commercial interest, or you want some dedicated time from me, I do consulting. It's $100 an hour Canadian. I can do it on Zoom. If you're local, I do travel as well, as needed. But I really want to get as much of this information out for free as possible. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions. I'm happy to help. So composting is so really cool. And the good news is you guys have been doing it your whole life. You're a pro already. You know there's certain foods that you shouldn't eat because they will give you problems, right? Either diarrhea, indigestion, and so on. You are anaerobically composting. That's what your body does. That's why your crap stinks. It's anaerobic. And if I want you to take that nose to your garden, if it stinks, I'm telling you, a plant is probably not going to live there. So use your nose. It's the of the senses, it's the most useful in gardening and in composting especially, but they're so intimately related. What is composting? Like, what's the purpose of it? Well, when you eat food, the composting process inside of you releases nutrients, enters your bloodstream, and it keeps you alive. In the context of gardening, this process is much more complete, right? We're fast composting. We're turning food around in a few hours. That's incredible. In a natural compost setting, thermophilic composting is the most commonly known. You've seen those big steaming piles. They're steaming and hot because, like that photo of the sun that was at the beginning of this presentation, is that they actually, due to their metabolic activities, through replicating and digesting food, they produce so much heat. In fact, they by volume, they produce more heat than the sun if you were to scale a compost pile up. So super fascinating. But as they're breaking down this material, a great thermophilic compost is made in 1 year. You can make it faster. You can do it in 18, 21 days, but it's not going to have the diversity that you need for really, really great compost. And really, really great compost is diverse. It's loaded with, and think about, you're taking a compost, which is think of it as like a food. You want to use one food to feed all plants on Earth. Well, how can that be? How can that be possible? Well, it's made possible by the diversity in the compost. So by composting for a year, so I take my material, it's in my pile, it's hot for a while, and eventually it cools down, and then the fungi take over, and it just goes through this whole cycle, and eventually it becomes soil. Compost worms move in and they do their thing. It's the diversity of that compost which happens over time that allows plants to eat. So how is compost a fertilizer? It is a vehicle. Think of it as a giant bus full of people, right? In this case, microbes. When those microbes get in the soil, they get in touch with a root, they start getting sugar. You see this whole thing happens, boom, fertilizer's going on. So how much compost do I need to feed a plant? Not a lot. If you think about how much COVID you needed to catch COVID or the flu, it didn't take a lot. Maybe it was a sneeze. Maybe it wasn't even a sneeze when you were around and you just picked up, one or two. They got inside of you, they got the environment that they needed, they started to breed up and replicate and so on. Well, the same thing is possible in the soil. If we can create a compost that has a massive amount of diversity, and then we infect the plant root with that diversity, the plant will select who it wants to work with, and then it will let the rest go dormant or even die, doesn't matter. The plant has what it needs, and it's now growing. So compost, you don't need a lot, but you do need to make it really good. And, it's a really frustrating sort of scenario that we live in our modern life, especially if you live in a city. It's really not fair what we do to the city to expect that they could create something good with the amount of volume that we send them. It's just too much. So really great compost starts with artisans, people like myself who've taken an approach of being selective about the ingredients that we use and purposefully building a compost that takes time. It sits on my land for a year, which is very expensive, so when I make compost, it's expensive. But guess what? You can do it yourself for free. You're already purchasing everything that you need. You buy food every day. Why give it to the city? Why give it away? Why not take that and capture it and turn it into fertilizer and feed it back to your plants? And you'll find that in doing so, you'll produce far more than you'll ever need. Another type of composting is vermicomposting. That's composting with worms. As I touched on earlier, it has limitations because worms don't have teeth. They can't eat protein. They need other organisms to break it down first. So when we're working with a worm bin, a worm farm, we're being selective about what we feed it. And that, obviously doesn't kind of fit with modern day eating. If you're a meat eater like I am, you've got bones, you've got meat, you've got all kinds of stuff. So that's where either thermophilic or bokashi composting, which is the third one listed here, which is an anaerobic style of composting, come in because they're able to take anything. I can put an entire animal in a thermophilic compost pile, and in 3 weeks, there'll be nothing left. No bones, nothing, no teeth. It will be gone. It's absolutely amazing. Bokashi, same thing. I can put absolutely anything in there, and then once it's fermented, and once it's done, it takes about 3 weeks with the conditions being ideal. Then I can take that food waste and I can just bury it in the ground and plant right next to it. Due to the activities of bokashi, remember we talked about lactobacillus earlier? Lactic acid bacteria, of which lactobacillus are one of those kind, are responsible for this type of fermentation. So they convert the food into a form that is no longer attractive to rodents. Think trash pandas, bears, all of these animals that are, they're not bad, they're not a problem, they're just trying to do a job. They're really attracted to food waste. So by bokashi composting, we can make the food waste unattractive to these pests. So it means that I can then take that food waste, if I'm a backyard gardener, I can go and put that in my hot compost, and I'm not going to attract rodents, which is super cool. And there are lots of other things that we can do with the leachate from bokashi, and so on. So that's a really quick, boom, boom, boom introduction to composting. But I think that's hopefully you have some questions about that. I teach composting, how to do it. I do a workshop locally here in Chilliwack called Compost Like a Pro. If you want hands-on, I'll be doing that in the spring. I can teach it over Zoom. I have successfully done it. If you're someone who's, you're a good learner, you're studious, and you're motivated, you can absolutely learn this online, and I do that as well. Let me see if there's anything else here. There's just nice picture. This is a steaming compost pile. See next. This is the kind of the fun fact, and I'm not joking. Go Google it if you think I'm lying to you. 276.5 watts per cubic meter. Same power density as a compost pile. That's really, really cool. I actually use this heat to heat my shipping container, which is, I have a lab at my farm. I've got these coils of hydronic heating coil tubing. I run water through it, and it heats the shipping container floor. It's pretty cool. So I wrapped it, and then I wrapped it again. And you can kind of see the temperatures that are produced, even when it's got snow on it. Not a difference in temperature. It's absolutely fascinating. This was the floor that I put in my shipping container. So think about this for an off-grid, style. You could, if you built a pile, you can build it in such a way it can last for a year and a half or more. So think about, yeah, a lot of effort, but I could produce heat and hot water. I can also produce natural gas, which I could then use as cooking fuel or to run vehicles using a thermophilic compost pile. It's pretty fascinating. This is an inside look at the lab. This is the system. There's an expansion tank. Got a little pump down here. I don't know if you can see my mouse. There's a little pump down here, really, really tiny. This could run off a solar panel, no problem. And it heats the floor. It's really cool. There's vermicompost. So we're kind of getting it time. If anyone would like maybe some of these screenshots, take one now or reach out to me and I can share these with you. I'll leave on this slide. This is a Pinot Gris grapevine on the left and the right. Notice the difference. The one on the left has a thicker stem. You can see that the root mass is bigger, and you can see that it has a third branch. The one on the right, much more scraggly, much less growth, a thinner stem. They're the exact same. They went in the exact same ground, which was hard packed clay. The difference is the one on the left was given 2 cups of worm castings. This is the power of worm castings. When a worm poops, remember I said it poops soil, it poops hormones, it results in a bigger root mass, about 30% bigger. If the root zone is bigger, the plant can interface more with the soil. It means it can get more water, it can get more nutrients. It's just a healthier, stronger plant. And what's really cool and not shown in any of the previous slides is that these organisms are loyal to a paycheck. So when they get in there and they start getting fed by a plant, they will begin to fight off and they build like a force field around the root zone, preventing pathogens from getting in and ruining that party. So super cool. Worm castings are key. Everybody should be having a worm bin. Just there's really, it's the finest fertilizer on the planet, and they're super easy to use. I have lots of content on my Instagram about this. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And yeah, thank you for taking time out of your holiday to listen to some of this. I hope that it has, taught you something. And again, you got questions, you know where I am. So I'll stick around for a few minutes if anyone wants to chat. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I did have a quick question about composting. So we have a family homestead. We're on 25 acres and have predominantly given all of our food scraps to animals. And so we've got readily available rabbit manure, pig manure, cow manure, and we are reclaiming a lot of land. So we also have a wood chipper. With the basis of like wood chips and manure, is that healthy enough to get a compost pile going? Because I know that's not necessarily the traditional way, but it's what we have on hand most.
Yes, absolutely. When I started learning how to compost, I was watching YouTube videos and I immediately went out and bought alfalfa, and I bought kelp meal, and I started buying these ingredients because I was trying to copy the person. But if you think about sustainability and regenerative agriculture or regenerative practices, we want to use what we have, and you've got good stuff. Absolutely. So taking what you have and composting it, like that's the holy grail, I think, especially if you've got manures. And manures are just they're really great. It doesn't matter what kind that you've got. Some of them are more challenging to work with than others, but if you've got a wood chipper and you got wood chips, that's the absolute best. If someone said to me, hey, I want to make compost, what ingredients would be my ideal ingredients? I would say wood chips 10 times out of 10. And that's just because of the amount of carbon that's in there, and what they do when that compost is finished. Even after a year, there's lots of chunks of wood that are still in there. And as a gardener, I haven't really touched on it with no dig or no till. The practice is we cover the ground. And for anyone who's a flower farmer here, stick around and I'll get into that, because that was one of the things that I commented on Flower Farmer's post where she's putting down this plastic and she's, putting holes in it and all that. And I wanted to explain, well, how do you not use plastic? It's with the wood chips, it's with straw or some other mulch. If I use straw in my compost, the problem is it breaks down and there's nothing left. So I'm missing out on that mulching activity. But wood chips allow me to have a compost that's loaded with life, but also when I put it on the ground, those wood chips will float to the top, and they provide a barrier against weed seeds. They also help keep moisture in the soil, and they provide home for predatory beneficials like that rove beetle that I was showing you earlier. They like it dark, moist, and they like to be near the plant. So that's really key. So if you got wood chips, I mean, that's outstanding. You don't need them, but they really are amazing to work with.
Yeah, the choice for us was either burn the material or chip the material, and we opted for the chipping. It was actually interesting. The first year we used the green wood chips for mulch, and it worked great for weed suppression. By the second year, we didn't renew anything, and it had composted itself down so much that our walkways that we had wood chipped were more fertile than the beds.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I love hearing that. That's obviously people in the prairies and in certain areas, it could be challenging to get a hold of wood chips, but if you've got them, I mean, they're the best. Just because of what you just explained, they're just creating an environment for fertility to go off, and that's for this style of gardening where you've got living pathways. The fundamental truth of gardening is to cover the ground with a living root would be ideal, or with decaying plant material. So think about what you just described, a compost or something breaking down, because you've put a slow release fertilizer that will slowly break down, and you better believe the plants are in there altering and manipulating the behavior of what's happening. We see that in our even like we did a brand new greenhouse setup this year for growing peppers, tomatoes, and cucumbers, and I put down wood chips 2 inches thick, the whole greenhouse. That dealt with the weed seeds, and because I didn't till, something that I failed to mention earlier is not only when you till do you kill, but you also bring up weed seeds. So you're shooting yourself in the foot before you run a marathon when you till. You really are. You're going to bring up this big bank of weed seeds that seemingly can never be depleted. And now they're just germinating everywhere. So by just covering the ground with some kind of decaying or organic material that can decay, think cardboard, is really good. If you can't get wood chips, you're just preventing, so you're not disturbing the soil, so there's no weed seeds coming up, and then you're preventing any weed seeds from landing. They've got nowhere to germinate, or very little. It's not no weeds, but it's definitely fewer. And then we just put compost on top, and by growing in that compost, and then you've got the wood chips or the cardboard or both underneath, that slowly breaks down. And if you just keep doing that, we're just adding a little bit of compost each time we grow. And that's how you can do succession planting. Have a look on my Instagram. I've got very recent videos where I showed our tomato house after we flipped it, and then we put garlic in, that we just took the tomatoes out and then put the garlic in. And I explain a little bit more about that in the videos.
Excellent. Thank you.
That's cool. Yeah, very, very cool. If you're on Instagram, feel free to reach out. Show me what you're doing. I'd love to see that, and I always like to share what people are doing.
Yeah, we'll do.
Cool. I see I've got some questions in the chat here. Carmen, do we do a Bokashi workshop? I do one in person if you're local. I could definitely do one on Zoom. If there's enough interest, I absolutely do it in the spring. Zoom is really handy because, for the obvious reasons, I don't have to physically be somewhere. And it is something that you can see. Also check my Instagram. I have lots of different Bokashi information on there. And if you're, you don't need to spend money. I'm a business. I sell worm farms. I sell worms and so on. But I want to just tell you guys, you don't need money for any of this. There are, if you have got time and you're willing to invest some effort, these are all things that you can do for free, including Bokashi. Bokashi uses microbes that we actually just harvest right out of the air. If you've ever made sauerkraut, you just take cabbage, you chop it up, and then you put salt on it, and you put it in a jar, and it just ferments. Like, where did the microbes come from? Well, they're already there. So you can make your own Bokashi inoculant pretty easily. Although I would recommend trying a commercially made one first, so that you have a baseline to compare when you make your own. How's it working? But you certainly don't need to. Matthew says, wood chips, spent grains, manure in my compost. What you have is an yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of wood chips, didn't you once do an experiment and you grew directly in wood chips with nothing else?
Yeah, absolutely. You can do potatoes like that. Um, they will thrive in that. And yeah, as long as you have minerals, you know, you have soil underneath, and then you put wood chips on top, lots of things can grow through that. And it's a little you know, I'm not going to put lettuce in wood chips and see great results, right? It depends. And certainly like if you look at our compost that we sell, they're called mulching composts, and they're, as you Shannon, Shannon's a customer of mine, and lives here in Chilliwack. There, you'll notice there's a lot of wood chips in the compost, and it's not a problem. Anyone from the conventional space will immediately panic and tell you that your wood chips are going to rob nitrogen. They're not wrong, but they're wrong. And it's about context. If you're a chemical grower, your soil is dead, you've got no microbes. If you put wood chips in your soil, yes, it's going to rob the nitrogen. But if you're a microbe feeding gardener working with compost, then not to worry. The wood chips are in there acting as fungal food. And as you know, I said previously, they're really there to provide this nice mulching layer. Mulching is key. If like, you know, I love to go to the beach and I'm just going to wear a bathing suit and it's great, but I'm going to turn into a lobster if I spend too much time in the sun, right? We wear clothing for a reason, especially when the temperature's not that great. The soil's the same way. Ultraviolet light kills microbes. So you really want to keep that ground covered, and doesn't matter what you mulch with, just avoid plastic. I really want to hate on plastic bad. It is so bad. You really need to cut it out of your life as much as possible. We don't even really have even begun to understand the problems that it's causing. It is leaching into your ground, it is ending up in your food, and it is ending up in your body, and it is causing problems. So yes, it's going to be a little bit more effort on the front side, and that's everything to do with working with nature. It's going to look like more effort in the beginning, but the long-term pain that you're going to avoid, it's I promise you it's worth it. You will end up doing less work, you will have more growth, you will have more time to spend with your plants or your family or whatever. And yeah, I couldn't agree more, Shannon. It's pretty cool seeing, just like if anyone's seen snowboarders, they have that backpack that will inflate when it detects that there's an avalanche, and that, because it behaves like a fluid, the backpack pulls the snowboarder or the skier to the surface where they float on top of the avalanche. Well, the same thing's happening with our compost. When leave those wood chips that are in there, don't worry about it. You don't need to sift them out. They will float to the top. They will create that nice weed barrier and all the other benefits that are there. Anyone else? Okay, cool. Well, I just want to thank you guys again, and happy gardening.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Love your content.
Thanks, Lisa.
See ya.